Welcome everyone. Again, this is the entry-level hiring in the AI era webinar today that we are hosting with Strada Institute for the Future of Work. My name is Michele Chang, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Strada Education Foundation. I'm very excited to be with you all today to talk about this exciting topic. Before we dive into the incredible data we have lined up, a couple quick housekeeping items. You are all entering muted with your videos off, but we want this to be an active conversation. We have the chat box available for conversation. And if you have any questions for our panelists as we move along in the webinar, you can use the Q&A box that you can find in your menu as well. Today, we'll be exploring a vital crossroad, how artificial intelligence is redefining what employers look for in early career talent and the implications for higher education and employers. We have a great lineup today of speakers to share their thoughts as well as the research that we have found. First, we have Andrew Hanson, Senior Director of Employer Alignment at Strada Education Foundation. We also have, after Andrew's going to share with us the findings and analysis from our report that he has so diligently done, and we are so excited to hear from him. Following Andrew's presentation, we'll be joined by three premier voices in the intersection of talent, education, and business. Alex Alonso, who is Chief Knowledge Officer at the Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. We have Ashley Finley, Vice President for Research and the Senior Advisor to the President at American Association of Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, and Joe Fuller, the Professor for Management Practice at Harvard Business School. To get us grounded in the facts, I'm going to run and turn this microphone over to Andrew Hanson to walk through the research and the findings.
Awesome. Thank you, Michele. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure many of us have been reading the headlines over the past year or more claiming that entry-level jobs are disappearing because of AI-based automation. Now, if that were true, it obviously would have huge implication for our collective efforts to connect education and opportunity and to help more people get good first jobs and launch their careers. So we wanted to hear directly from employers on this topic to get an in-depth understanding of what they're experiencing. So in March, we surveyed about 1,500 employers and asked them questions like, is AI increasing or decreasing entry-level hiring? And how is it changing entry-level work, like the skills you value and the mix of jobs you offer? The results, as I'm sure you'll see, will paint a more hopeful picture of the future than what we're reading in the news. A few notes on the survey before we get into the results. So everything that we're looking at today refers strictly to entry-level hiring in the US. So if you hear me just say hiring, you're safe in assuming that I mean entry-level hiring. The respondents include a mix of executives and senior talent leaders who had ultimate responsibility for hiring, most commonly CEOs, presidents, and general managers. And it was for businesses and organizations who hire at the entry level. We had, as I said, nearly 1,500 employers in our sample, which is representative across industries, employer sizes, and regions. In the survey, we looked at 4 core topics or areas: the volume of entry-level hiring, how employers were using AI, the factors driving entry-level hiring decisions, and work-based learning. So with that, let's dig into the results. And what we first saw was that, as I noted, in spite of the doom and gloom that we're regularly reading about the threat of AI to jobs, employers do seem to have more positive sentiments about how it's affecting the volume of entry-level hires, at least so far. So we first asked employers directly how the use of AI tools affected the volume of entry-level hires in 2025 and the anticipated effect for 2026. And as you can see, they were very positive, about 4 times more likely to say that AI helped them increase entry-level hiring in 2025, and 3 times more likely to anticipate that AI would help them increase hiring in 2026. Similarly, we looked at what was driving these shifts. Companies expanding their entry-level hiring headcounts credited AI as a major tailwind for growth, while companies pulling back largely did not point to AI as the culprit. Instead, they pointed to classic macroeconomic factors like economic conditions and the overall quality of the candidate pool. We also asked employers about how they're using AI and found that the vast majority, about 9 in 10 employers, are at least exploring AI, with 22% saying they had strategically integrated it, meaning that they had a clear company-wide plan for using it across their teams and business units. We wanted to see what separated the companies who using AI to grow from those using it to downsize. And the most notable differentiator we found was how integrated AI was. Companies who are increasing headcount were far more likely to have comprehensively integrated it across their business functions, as we see here, which is that the more employers had integrated AI, the more likely they were to say that it is increasing the number of entry-level opportunities at their firm, both for 2025 and looking ahead to 2026. We then asked, what kinds of jobs are you increasing and decreasing headcount for? And first, for employers who said AI was helping them increase headcount, they pointed to a mix of tech and business roles. Nearly 60% of these employers said AI was helping them increase tech roles like data science, IT, software development, and cybersecurity, while roughly 40% said it was helping them boost business roles like marketing, retail, warehouse automation, and process management. For employers who were decreasing hiring, we asked which roles they were decreasing, and they similarly pointed to a mix of business and tech roles, the most common of which were administrative roles, customer support, and data analytics. And you'll probably notice a paradox here, which is that both of these lists contain tech and business roles. And the takeaway is that AI isn't eliminating departments, it's filtering out specific tasks, which is leading to an evolution in the kinds of roles in each of these departments. So after jobs, we wanted to know about skills. How are entry-level skill demands evolving because of AI, and which skills are most important? For employers who had at least explored using AI, we asked how it's changing the nature of entry-level work. And as we look at this slide, I'll note three takeaways from the results. First is that AI is having a widespread effect on the tasks involved in entry-level work. We saw that only 20% of employers said it's led to no meaningful change, and less than 10% in the tech sector. The second is that across industry, AI is simultaneously reducing or substituting for routine and administrative tasks, but it is also increasing or augmenting the higher order tasks that involve analysis and judgment. So many who claim that entry-level jobs are going away suggest that most of what's happening is substitution, but in reality, we're seeing both substitution and augmentation at similar levels. The third is, as you might expect, this evolution of the tasks involved in entry-level roles is especially concentrated in the tech, manufacturing, and finance sectors. So on the whole, as we look at this, we see that AI is indeed affecting entry-level work, in essence, moving it away from the sort of, quote, grunt work toward the kind of work we historically associate with mid-level roles. Now, looking specifically at employers who typically hire at the bachelor's degree level, we asked employers to rate 7 skills based on how important they were for entry-level roles, as well as how recent graduates performed on them. And on importance, as we look across the entry-level job market for college grads, we see that foundational abilities like critical thinking, communication, and collaboration were rated as the most important, while AI literacy was actually rated as the least important. Also notably, employers rated performance lower than importance on every single skill except for AI literacy. And so, at least in the eyes of employers, their perspective seems to be that the incoming talent has the tech skills down, but it's those foundational abilities where the gap continues to exist. And interestingly, as we look at the hierarchy of skills here, it is essentially unchanged compared to, say, a decade ago. So we then asked employers how they make hiring decisions and which factors are more or less important. And what we see is that across the entire entry-level job market, work experience was rated as far and away the most important factor. The bachelor's degree had the second highest rating of critical importance, and more than 70% of employers said that a referral from a trusted source was at least somewhat important. For employers who typically hire college grads, we ran a little experiment. we handed them 7 different candidate profiles featuring a mix of internships, regular jobs, project-based work experiences, elite academic credentials, and campus leadership experiences. And we asked them to stack rank their choices in terms of who they would most and least prefer. And as we look at the results, 2 major takeaways stood out. First is that work experience beat out elite academic credentials across the board. And the second was the ultimate differentiator really wasn't prestige, it was relevance. Was the work experience in a related role? Was it in my industry? The particular mode of how candidates acquired that work experience mattered less. And then the last topic we looked at was how employers evaluated college graduates with different majors. We first asked, again, employers who typically hire college graduates to rate the performance of their college grad hires across the 3 different skill domains that you see here: critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, from 1 to 5, ranging from poor to excellent. And the main takeaway that we saw was that no single major stood out as the best preparation for each of these core skills. Math-intensive STEM majors were rated the highest on critical thinking. Communications majors were rated the highest on, you guessed it, communication. And arts and humanities majors, along with communications majors, were rated the highest on collaboration. And finally, we asked employers who typically hire college grads to rank majors based on how difficult they were to hire to get a sense of the relative supply and demand of these majors. And as you see, math-intensive STEM and math-intensive business majors were the most difficult to hire, while employers had relatively less difficulty hiring arts, humanities, social sciences, and communications majors. We did ask this question both for generalist and specialist roles, but didn't see any interesting variation in the results. So very excited for the upcoming panel discussion. I'll just offer a few concluding remarks. Obviously, we're still in the early chapters of AI, but my own bias is that the collective evidence warrants a tone of cautious optimism about the future. We're seeing that the first rung on the career ladder doesn't seem to be disappearing, but it is being rebuilt at a higher level. And, as I noted, much of the routine, repetitive grunt work that allowed many of us to get our footing in the workplace is being automated, at least to some extent, but it is also being replaced by these higher order tasks that require these core critical thinking, communication, collaboration skills. And so the dual challenge ahead for our collective work, as I see it, is 1, how do we ensure that the pathways to entry-level jobs keep pace with that higher baseline? And 2, how do we help more learners get access to the kinds of work experience that employers value? So with that, thank you, and I will pass the microphone back to Michele.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And before you go, Andrew, we just had one question that maybe you can help clarify from the research that you had done. There was a question of whether entry level means GED, high school diploma required, or just some level of college degree or post-secondary training.
Great question. The definition we gave is 3 or fewer years of relevant work experience across the entry-level job market. But as I noted or sort of flagged for you across the analysis, we're able to break the data down based on employers who typically hire college graduates, as well as those who typically hire at sort of middle education levels, like, for example, associate degree or non-degree credentials, as well as jobs that require a high school education.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And now, again, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Joe Fuller, Alex Alonso, and Ashley Finley. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really excited about this conversation. As Andrew shared, we had so many interesting insights from this report, but we know there's a lot more than just what a report will say. And so we're excited to get the perspective from these 3 exceptional individuals. So first, the first thing we want to dive into is how much AI is helping employers increase entry-level opportunities, which, as Andrew highlighted, was a surprising finding from our report. And so we'd like to really dig into, what did you all make of that result, that employers were more likely to say AI was helping them increase rather than decrease entry-level roles, and that companies with higher levels of AI integration were the ones that were more likely to use it as a way to expand entry-level opportunities. So I'd actually like to start with Professor Fuller to see his thoughts on this, as I know he's done a lot of work on looking at the future of work.
Well, Michele, thank you for having me, and pleasure to be with your audience. I think the study is a pleasant surprise, but I think the results are what we'd say are early innings results. A paper which tracks with your findings by Catherine Bonney and her team at the U.S. Census Bureau, called The Microstructure of AI Diffusion, pretty fancy sounding title, showed some pretty similar results, but it also showed that adoption of AI and the expansion of employment related to AI was in large companies, 18% of enterprises, but 32% of headcount, often supported by technology vendors, generally limited to one of three functions: marketing, sales, business development, strategy, and IT. So the reason I'm saying this is an early indication, but one we shouldn't be too quick to assume is an indication of the long term, is that large companies focus in a few functions which have demonstrated business cases for the application of AI, does not speak to the sweep of a general purpose technology. And there is some other data that's a little more unsettling, such as the unemployment rate for recent master's degrees graduates being 50% higher than the 3-year trend line, the unemployment rate for 20 to 24-year-old college graduates being 15% higher than the trend line. So a lot of different signals here, early innings, really interesting, provocative data, and I'm sure we're all hopeful that the trend will continue. But if you look at predictions of what was happening with things like the deployment of mobile technology and internet, there are a lot of false negatives and false positives early in the process.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Alex, would you like to chime in there as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about some of the research that we've seen recently, which sort of validates both what Andrew and Joe are talking about in terms of these being positive, yet also sort of early innings results. When I think specifically about the data that we capture, on a weekly basis, we capture what is roughly data from over 25,000 employers on a recurring basis, specifically looking at what it is that they're doing in response to the adoption of AI and mass adoption of AI. To Joe's point, for the larger employers, they're able to bring back and actually reshuffle work the way that they think they should do that, right? And so to give you context, what we're seeing is on a profession level or industry level, that means really looking at how work gets done and what is qualified as entry-level work, and then beyond that, going into what qualifies as not entry-level work. And because of that, what we're actually running into is a space where we see from our own data, roughly 57% of employers, and these are the HR leaders of those employers, saying we are now redefining what the work means to identify what entry-level work looks like, right? And so as you think specifically about what we're seeing, we're actually looking at, in some cases, there are professions, whole professions, that are going through a great truncation kind of movement, which is we're redefining what the entry level work looks like, but we're also redefining what the most strategic, creative level work looks like. And so that creates a scenario where, yes, we may be adding new definitions of what entry level work looks like, but at the same time, the overall whole of that profession is actually shrinking, stagnating, or having a different kind of perspective. And I'll give you an example. What we see more than anything else when thinking specifically about our labor economic view into this, we tie that to the behavioral work that we see with our employer population. And what we find more than anything else is if you look at it today, there are 22.6 million jobs today that are not subject to displacement because of what we call AI as we think about it since 2022. They're actually subject to automation, right? And Andrew keeps using the term grunt work, and in reality, I think of it, coming from my working class parents, I think about it. No, there is no such thing as grunt work, right? But one of the things that stands out is we keep seeing this notion that work is actually much more highly automatable over and over again. And if you were to think about that's people who have at least 50% of their jobs today that could be fully automated. When we think about that entry level work, we should think broadly about what that falls into, because we're in this great churn that for some professions means full truncation and disappearing, but for other professions actually means a complete revolution in a different way, right? And so I raise that largely because there's great context that needs to be accounted for. But this is remarkably positive looking at this work. And I do think there's an opportunity to look at that. And by the way, I didn't say this up front, but just like Joe, I'm ecstatic to be here with you all. And I'm grateful to be part of the panel.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And I think you are highlighting one of the things that we did want to dive into a bit more was about how employers are saying that AI is both helping them do what you might call some of the more routine grunt work, but also increasing tasks that involve higher order skills that involve more judgment and analysis. So I think you're highlighting a great thing that we're seeing that potentially is happening here is the redefinition of what entry level means and perhaps some movement to more mid-level type of roles. Before we move on from that, anything Joe or Ashley you'd like to add on that topic before we talk a bit more about what this means for credentials and skills and majors?
Just a quick observation, Michele, which is we see in our data at Harvard and also in some recently published Anthropic data that AI utilization really peaks at around the 70th percentile of income and then diminishes pretty quickly thereafter, which is an anomaly because certainly in our analysis, if you put wage data as a log of wages and compare it with anticipated penetration of AI against task, it's almost a slope of 1 up to like the 95th percentile. So you really expect those higher wage workers to be using it at a higher rate than they are. And I think what we're seeing is some demographic matching, that companies are putting veteran employees with low technical aptitude, but high contextual intelligence, and they're hiring some young talent to support it. And certainly, we're telling some of the companies we're working with directly on a consulting basis, think about building your teams as demographically diverse, not so much in terms of race and gender as it would have been 5 years ago, but put that 30-year veteran with the second-year employee with the CS degree from Carnegie Mellon, and you're going to put technical intelligence, contextual intelligence, and you might get something pretty exciting.
It's a really interesting insight. Ashley, did you want to jump in there?
I will just say something quickly and just to join in and again also say that I'm so excited to be part of this conversation, delighted to be with you all. Just as we're on this particular topic, I think it's worth mentioning, and my background as a sociologist is in work and occupations, the push-pull of labor, of occupations since the Industrial Revolutions is the push-pull of automation and specialization. So it is worth underscoring as we have each new data point. I realized as we were having this conversation, the visual in my mind is the connect the dots, where like the really good ones where you don't actually know exactly what the picture is going to be until you connect all the dots. So it's like each new data point gets us a little closer to seeing what this picture looks like. But this is the push-pull of the history of work, of labor, is to automate. And we are yet again in a really exquisite tension point of what it means to live with that level of automation and how exactly it will disrupt work, and it will recede, and we will figure it out. But that's what it's reminding me of. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, just a quick reminder for everyone on the webinar as well. We do have the chat function. So I see a number of folks are getting in there and introducing themselves, but also we do have a Q&A function. If you have any questions for our panelists at the end of our panel discussion, we will take a few questions from the field. The next one we wanted to dive into is obviously there's a lot of emphasis on AI skills today, but employers are continuing to value foundational abilities such as critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. And as Andrew noted, the hierarchy of skills is basically the same as it was a decade ago. So actually, I'd love to pull you into this conversation and see how have you seen how educators are thinking about which skills employers are valuing and how those efforts have been made to integrate AI skills into curriculum.
I think as we, I'm reflecting a lot on how we think about quantitative literacy when calculators are a fluid part of how we perform that function, right? Does it still matter if my kids are able to do long division? Will they move on to other things? It, I do think one of the resonating with the idea that we are still talking about a similar set of skills. And in fact, one of the things that I think, if anything, we're missing on that list, or that I would encourage people listening to be thinking about, is the way in which things like curiosity, resilience, persistence, that growth mindset, right? This notion of how dispositions and mindsets that come in to work with those skills and how they are consistently applied. Well, we know for our own employer research that those are not the fluffy things on the sides. Those are absolutely as critical and essential as collaboration, critical thinking, communication skills. So the ways in which we think about augmentation and the ways in which we think about how AI is augmenting and enhancing those skills, it seems quite resonant with me, and I hope is great news for the kinds of things that we've been doing for a long time in the curriculum. I think it is great news for the kinds of things we're still doing in the curriculum. So what will be increasingly important is that students understand they are acquiring those skills. We still need to have the same conversations about students being empowered to recognize how and where they have built those skills and are able to communicate those to employers.
Thank you, Ashley. Alex, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sorry, and you can see the excited person in me. This is actually something that I think is more often than not overlooked, right? Which is, it is the same skills that are needed, right? We have such a desire to want to define this construct of what is AI fluency and the skill set around it, that we don't actually think about what are the core inner cognitive processes and abilities that we really are looking at in a different use case more often than not actually building new fluencies. What I find particularly interesting is, if you were to ask most employers today, right, just for same sample, same group of employers, we know that there are roughly 9% of employers who have a definition of what they consider to be AI literacy. That means 9 out of every 10 do not have an actual functional definition of what they're looking for when they're defining an AI literacy kind of definition, right? And what I find particularly galling about that is we use that as a criterion for making decisions around what it is that we're looking for talent, how we will evaluate talent, and then beyond that, for any partnership. When you look about public-private partnerships, when you look about educational institution partnerships, right? Employers wanting and seeking talent that brings together some sort of skill, but we can't even define the skill that we're looking for and what proficiency and or performance looks like. So we at SHRM, just as an example, one of the things that we've worked on over the last quarter is actually defining what AI literacy looks like, but more importantly, doing so in a way that is actually user-friendly, but comes with a look at what are those power skills, those skills that are the ones we've always known about, that those cognitive processes, which ones are the ones that actually lead to this notion of AI literacy, but more importantly, what is productivity? And we mean incremental performance above and beyond what you get with the standard cognitive abilities and or personality traits, other skills, abilities and traits that we think of when we think about the traditional model of KSAOs, right? My inner IO psychologist is just coming out now. And what we find is so true to what Ashley was just saying. The levers for driving what are higher levels of proficiency and productivity when it comes to AI, what predicts further, are things like curiosity, are things like not your computational skill, but your ability to say, this is the problem I'd like to tackle, and actually being able to communicate that in a way that can pull context and deliver context back and forth when thinking about that. So those are the levers that actually drive that. And we see that those relationships actually have real collinearity or can correlate with what we're looking for, as opposed to thinking specifically about what we see traditionally, which are the things that you would think of across any kind of tech revolution.
Just to build on what Alex was saying, Michele, for a second, I think it's borne out in a very good article late last year in the Harvard Business Review on the phenomena of what's called work slop, which is AI-generated content, which at first blush seems to be substantial, but with any kind of further inquiry proves out to be essentially shallow, indefensible, conventional wisdom. And workers are reporting that 40% of them had received some substantial work slop in the last month, and it accounted for 15% of the work product they had received. They were tending to get it from peers, but they're also getting it occasionally from their supervisors. So you have to have imagination, the ability to take a risk, be resilient, raise with someone. This work doesn't make sense to me. Are you sure? And all the types of social foundational skills we've been talking to in the last 10 minutes gain a premium in this world, because this is a general purpose technology. It's going to be integrated. It's better thought of as a decision to change the way you structure and manage work than acquire a technology. It's going to become so integral to processes that involve other humans that all the foundational skills are going to be escalated in importance for that reason, as well as the fact that some of the technical jobs in each skill, in each position, will get automated or augmented away. And by act of transitivity, what's left as a greater ratio of the skills you're seeking are those skills that automation was not even close to replicating, the foundation skills.
Just to layer on a little bit, Michele, I know you're trying to move to the next, but
Yeah, no worries.
work slop is a genius term. But the latest trend is actually what we're seeing, that 82% of workers and supervisors agree they are reporting. It's not just work slop, it's work slop lasagna. And that is where you pile work slop on top of other work slop, on top of more work slop. And like any good lasagna, it tastes good going in, but it makes you sluggish on the way out. Productivity actually slows you way, way down. And what's fascinating about that is not only do they report actually seeing it, another 70% say they engage in it, meaning that they actually practice it as part of their performance. That is a dangerous phenomenon.
Definitely don't want that kind of lasagna, so we're going to have to be careful. Thank you for highlighting that. Well, we did want to also touch a bit on work-based learning. A big theme of the results that we saw was that work experience was a key differentiator on who's more likely to get hired. So that it's really hard when you think about jobs at the entry level. It's a bit counterintuitive to think about work experience for someone that you're hiring at the entry level. So we'd love to put it to this panel. How should we think about better integrating work experience into post-secondary education? And maybe Ashley, you could get us started given your role in post-secondary education.
Yeah, happy to, particularly given the way in which we talk about high impact practices, which are really effective and engaging educational experiences that we've long talked about in higher education, things like learning communities, capstone courses, first year seminars. There's no reason that we shouldn't be thinking about what it means to have a work integrated or work-based experience in any one of what we might call curricular anchors as really these kind of touch points that we often are seeding throughout the curriculum as points of opportunity and deep engagement among students. What we fail to do in those spaces is really define what work-based means. What does work integrated mean? And I'm in one example is Gutman Community College in New York, Bunker Hill Community Colleges, Massachusetts, do a program called Ethnographies of Work. That's a required first year or entry level experience in which students are going into a workplace, any workplace, and effectively observing, evaluating, and analyzing the culture of the workspace. right? And that's a really important and interesting work-based experience that can happen early on, that's deeply connected within the curriculum and embedded within disciplines. So I think part of our bigger issue is really thinking about what does a viable work-based experience or work integrated experience look like? I think a lot of times you're just asking students to reflect on what are the skills involved? What is my relationship to these skills? Who am I? What is my temperament in relationship to this? What problem is being solved? So there's some really important, critical, and fundamental things that can be done all along the way in how we think about what those work-based experiences are beyond the internship, right? Like that's really what we're talking about here is what's the difference of, if we're only talking about internships, I think we have a sense of what that means, but unless you're probably one of those campuses that are trying to scale internships, it's really challenging to do. And I appreciate Strada's work, quite frankly, on what work-based means, what it means to have paid experiences for that, and just how we're thinking much more robustly beyond the internship as the only place, the only way we're thinking about that.
Thanks, Ashley. Yes, as Ashley highlighted, for those who haven't followed, Strada has done quite a bit of work on work-based learning and really brought in the definition of what it is and quite beyond internships. So certainly urge you to take a look at some of the reports that we've done there. We've had a recent report on who's actually getting paid with work-based learning experiences. So definitely encourage you all to take a look at that. Alex, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I would just say, we have actually engaged, and this is actually in partnership with groups like Strada and other groups like Stand Together and Charles Koch Foundation. One of the things that we've and Walmart Foundation, forgive me. One of the things that we've looked at specifically is what it is that recruiters and or HR professionals, executives, and hiring managers see when it is that they are looking and thinking about what is it that drives their perception of work experience, right? What is it that you would specifically look at and say, this is what I mean by work experience? Because not all work experiences are equal, right? And adding work experience elements to the education is always a critical component. But one of the things that we went a step further, because it was fascinating, you see work experience across the board, it didn't matter which sample we were looking at, said, this is number one, and this is what I'm looking for when thinking about the most important thing. I want to know where they worked. I want to know the kind of work that they did, and I want to understand the kind of output that they're capable of, right? One of the things that we actually went back to, and this is the same samples, roughly, I want to say almost 2.5 years later, one of the things that we asked them is, what would you, in lieu of work experience, what would you accept in an era of AI as potential substitutes for that would draw your eye? And the number one thing that CHROs or hiring managers or recruiters or anything like that said was, well, I'd love to be able to talk to any digital asset that this person created from the use of AI. So for instance, if they created a digital twin, if they created an assistant, if they created an agent, let me test that out. Let me blow it up and let me see what I can learn from it. And number two is show me how you interact with your own AI. Not just the prompting, but show me the depth of skill and thinking that you throw at this as a substitute for, okay, so you don't have work experience, but prove to me that you have those entry-level skills that I can throw you at bigger problems down the line. And that prompting and people's prompt approaches, right? Really, their prompting was the best way to demonstrate that for a given series of professions and or industries. To me, that was particularly telling because if you had asked 2.5 years ago, not a single one of them would have said anything about AI. But all of them are adapting, knowing that they have to adapt when thinking about the talent that comes forth. And so that in and of itself not only points to the transformation that we're talking about, but to Ashley's point, starts to look at how we actually build out alternatives that really make the most sense, especially in the preparation process, but beyond that.
Joe, did you want to chime in?
Yes, I think there's a hopeful signal in this discussion, and we can build on the early hope that the excellent study speaks to. For years, employers have been very reluctant to invest in creating lots of new opportunities for work-based learning. Even when you show them great results from other companies and other programs, they want too often some near guarantee that engaging in accepting work-based learners, whether it's co-op, earlier internships, apprenticeship programs, federally registered or not, we can put all that hair splitting aside. And now with Workforce Pell coming up, you're very reluctant. How do I know this is going to work out? This could be expensive for me. I could get sued. I could get unionized. The more they require some proof of capacity to do a job and interest in and durability in doing a job, so they don't run the risk of someone who's actually studied something but actually he's never done it and doesn't know that they want to stay doing it, the more they're going to be attracted to, I want to rent to own. I want to see this person in my workplace, see the foundation skills, see the drive, see the aptitude, see the grit. And I think this may finally get us on a path where more employers are saying, I can't trust credentials. And 90% of recruiters and 50% of hiring managers report seeing applications, AI supported, that have false claims, false credentials, false representations of AI knowledge. More reporting, a third of hiring managers and 40% of recruiters are reporting more in-person interviewing now with more focused, targeted questions. The next logical step is, let's say, hire the college sophomore, heaven forbid, a college sophomore with an internship. And if they're good that summer, I'll hire them the next summer. If they're good that summer, I'm going to give them a job offer, which includes me paying for their senior year in college if they come back, with a demand note behind it. No, it's not going to just be here, take a scholarship. But people are going to have to go there with the velocity of technology. With the rate the AI LLMs are changing, your 201 level course in computer science you took as a sophomore will be N-5 technology when you're hired after your senior year. I can't rely on the report card any longer.
It's a tough changing world. And Joe, something you said made me think of something else we had discussed as we were preparing for this panel is, obviously we're talking a lot about how AI is impacting the type of skills employers are looking for, but we also cannot overlook the fact that a lot of HR managers and hiring managers are utilizing AI as they are looking for entry-level candidates as well. So just curious if you all might be able to opine a little bit on what you're seeing from that perspective and how that's also changing and shifting hiring at the entry level.
I'll jump in first just because I probably spend the most time with hiring managers and HR professionals, right? One of the things that we're seeing specifically in the recruitment process is a tension that exists predominantly in the use of AI. We have a series of regulatory bodies who are pushing for this notion of, if there is a final employment decision that needs to be made about a human, it should involve a human set of judgment in it, and specifically not just use AI in any way, shape, or form. What that has done is had trickle-down effects in terms of the way organizations are actually starting to use AI relative to what the original HR roadmap may have looked like prior to that regulatory approach. Predominantly, it was in the world of recruitment and talent acquisition, and more importantly, talent assessment, right? How do I go about actually judging talent and or evaluating talent and their ability to actually do the performance and the criteria that we needed? That was the first boom that we saw. That has actually led to some recession because of the regulatory nature of what we're seeing. However, predominantly in New York City, Colorado, and then California. But what we're seeing is now a movement where we're seeing a push towards looking at a couple other things. In other words, we're seeing groups that are focused primarily on embedding AI in the recruitment process to unlock and provide sources of new talent, and thinking about how you might bring in talent that you may never have considered. So much so that we're actually seeing examples of this pop up. For instance, one of the things that I've actually seen as an example is the notion of taking heavy mobile equipment mechanics from a large employer, a federal employer, that looks specifically at how they look at their skills and taking them, because they have all been apprentices and or mentors in some way, shape, or form, and porting them to educator roles. as a primary example. Entry-level educator roles to say, okay, this is how we do that. It came because of an AI-based solution that actually said, when you look at the career map of these, or the profession map of these two kind of roles, there is a lot more between their DNA than you might actually think. That's an example of where AI is being applied to see solutions that we don't normally see, the sort of the same way that you think about pharma and new drugs and new medications in that regard. The other thing that I think is particularly telling, though, is we're seeing it actually move away from what is that talent identification sphere and now moving into the talent nurturing sphere, and really doing more to help organizations and employers think about how they nurture both potential candidates, how they nurture a pipeline of talent coming their way, and what it is that they're doing. Now, the natural input there is, it is an actual perfect benefit, if you were to think about it, a marriage, if you will, between the pipeline of professionals, future professionals that are coming in as entry-level professionals, and employers, large employers in particular, thinking about how their AI chooses to nurture that pipeline. Before you know about it, you actually then begin to create a symbiotic relationship that says, if I'm an educational institution or a pillar of academic integrity and rigor and development, one of the things that I might look at is, how do I take that workforce development that I am putting forth in terms of the way we nurture these power skills and make it so that it actually stands out in a variety of these pipeline management and or pipeline nurturing kind of AI that exist out there. The employer community is signaling those and saying, please come back and give us that talent, and we will make these available to you so you know what we're looking for and how we want even that pipeline to develop. We will feed them back to you and make sure that you can redevelop them in ways that we need. Those are just two examples of where we're seeing real AI application and changing the behavior of employers. I'd love to see how that actually leads to changes in the partnership and the communication and throughput that happens between educational institutions and employers.
Thanks, Alex. Unless Joe and Ashley, did you want to jump in there? We were going to move to some questions from the field, but happy to give you a few seconds if you have something you'd like to chime in on.
I'll jump in quickly, Michele, just because I actually saw one of the questions in the chat was around equity and what are the implications for equity and inclusion as we think about some of this. And Alex just laid out a lovely point around how AI is used to actually maybe discover latent skills in jobs and in a person's work history that we might miss. Reminds me a lot, this could be a little bit of a throwback for some of you, but it reminds me of the early days of the Music Genome Project, where Pandora and Spotify, Pandora was one of the first to do it, but right, would put together a playlist. You're like, wow, I love this song, and I would have thought to put it with this song. And it's because it's analyzing the latent characteristics of the music. And that is what we are going to be able to do. This is actually in the wild west of what we're talking about. No question, right? Still so much yet to be seen. One of the ways I get really excited about what I hope we will see is the way in which we do discover talent in ways that never had a chance, in ways that in the ways in which we honor pathways in the arts and humanities, the ways we have a much better understanding and visibility of what are the skills being built across a number of different pathways, the way we might be able to honor work study in richer and deeper ways than we have before, because we're able to analyze maybe using AI. So I so appreciate that point by Alex and wanted to double down on that.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a number of questions from the participants on the webinar. We're going to try to get to as many as we can, and then we'll come back to the panel for some closing remarks. I'd like to also welcome back Andrew Hanson, as there are some questions that he may be able to help provide some color on. We've got a couple questions curious on how our survey findings impact the hiring of graduates who studied computer science or IT, and what, obviously, in the media, we've heard a lot of attention around what's happening to these graduates in particular. So I think the questions around any thoughts around those type of graduates and what their career prospects may look like.
Really great question, and something that I think has been top of mind for many of us at Strada. Obviously, we saw over the past decade or so just an explosion in the number of students studying computer science, and then a more recent decline or perhaps a regression in the past couple of years, like thinking about this signal and perhaps overcorrecting, let's say. In my own bias is that the death of computer science has been greatly exaggerated. I think that certainly the survey, if you look specifically at the mix of jobs that are included, the evolution of tech roles as opposed to the complete automation of it is like what we see in that data. But a number of other interesting data points from studies that have come out in the field, such as the continued growth of software developers, the employment of software developers over the past couple of years. And so I think it is something that we're paying attention to. And I think, we don't want to, jump to conclusions too quickly before this sort of plays itself out. But I think there's still promise there. It wasn't a major topic of what we looked at, but again, and the other, I should have mentioned, the other relevant find results was that the majors, right, still math-intensive STEM majors continue to be very difficult to hire for in the minds of employers and are valued as well. Certainly, as we look at the earnings of folks who study computer science, they continue to be in, I believe, the top three. And so that's what I share.
Thank you, Andrew. Another question we have here is, what recommendations or thoughts do you all have on how AI is impacting recent graduates, both at the associate level, but also in the skilled trades?
I would actually, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, in a model that I'll be publishing soon with Accenture Research, what you see is that really no job is unaffected, and the degree of effect in skilled trade is less, but it often affects things like storing measurements, scheduling workers, ordering inventory, submitting proposals. Interestingly, right now there's a company that sells AI-equipped drones to roofers, and they fly over your roof and do all the measurements. So the roofers look for a roof that's failing and send the homeowner, I took pictures of your roof, it's failing, and here's my bid because I've measured it using an AI-supported camera. So there are elements of skilled trades that are hard. It's not quite the dirty, dark, dangerous we use in manufacturing and mining and ag, but AI, it doesn't matter what career you're in, it can do a lot of the dull, dispiriting, and deterministic work that people would just love to offload so they can do the main tasks that they enjoy.
And the only thing I'd add to that is I see prime examples of that happening all over the place, where you're bringing people into a profession or changing materially how that skilled trade may actually shift. And the example I think of is I sit on the National Council for Credentialing Crane Operators, and they credential close to 600,000 crane operators every year. One of the things that stands out is their future is actually one that's driven more towards drone technology and AI-based technology for spatial reasoning. And as we see that, there are a whole new set of skills, opportunities, and professionals that are more likely to be able to move into that trade and see opportunities to have greater transportability into the skill set that they're bringing that you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. So that's an example where all of a sudden you're seeing real potential, right? But to Joe's point, it's in the targeted approaches unless you're seeing a wholesale shift in the technology that they support.
Michele, can I add one quick point here that I don't think has been lifted up? And I keep being mindful of the time, but we're talking a lot about how AI changes like very specific task-oriented skills, which makes a ton of sense. But I really appreciate SHRM's work on civility, and in particular, SHRM's work on developing a civility index and calculating the amount of lost production that is of consequence that is borne out by having incivility in the workplace. We know from our own AAC&U employer research that about fully 2/3 of employers say that students' ability to reason through and manage civil discourse or disagreement, constructive dialogue across disagreement is very useful in the workplace. I'm thinking about colleagues that I know that have rerun an email through AI and said, make this nicer. Tone this down a little bit. So I just wanted to add that in that there are these human elements of how we think about teamwork, the fundamentals of collaboration, and how invaluable it might be to take a beat and run something through AI that's going to help with those kinds of skills too.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. All right, as we near the top of the hour, just want to do one more quick round for everyone on the panel and just get, how are you feeling about the future of work and where our education and our workforce systems going and where career pathways need to go from here? Joe, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm probably more bearish in the intermediate term than certainly many of the people that study this in the academy. The reason for that is twofold, threefold maybe. One is that the rate of progression in the last year in the LLMs is astonishing, and 80% of the venture capital that's been invested in the last 2 years in the United States is in AI native offers. So you're going to get a tremendous continuation of the innovation explosion. And every time you get a job that is somehow insulated or protected from AI's penetration, that's a market signal that tells investors and entrepreneurs and inventors, if you can solve this problem and unlock a lot of extra productivity with innovations in a model, you're going to be rich and famous. And so, and finally, I just want to refer to something Alex touched on. If you look at the way AI is being deployed in China, it's much more integrated with forms of automation. And we're a post-industrial society largely. It may, in fact, help reshoring when we can have more or less lights-out plants here based on AI with automation. But we haven't seen that type of adoption yet in the U.S., and that's going to lead to another wave of disruption. So I think we'll get a lot of productivity improvements and quality of human life and quality of follow-on invention like in healthcare. But I think it's going to be a rocky 10 to 20 years in terms of labor market rules, and organizations going to have challenge changing the way they approach both creating skilled people and deploying them as they try to get their heads around how do you actually manage in the era of a true general purpose technology.
Thank you, Joe. Now we're at the top of the hour, but Alex asked to just give you a quick couple seconds to maybe have some closing comments.
Well, I will say, the big fear is that Skynet is here. I joked with my fellow panelists yesterday about Skynet being here. I don't actually believe that. I think that we are, to Joe's point, in an era where we are actually seeing the greatest return on investment, specifically workforce investment, comes from a marriage of AI plus HI, as we call it at SHRM. And I'd argue that the better suited economies will be the ones that actually leverage that and build systems to make as much AI plus HI as possible.
And I would just add, for the higher ed folks in the audience really trying to figure this out, getting their AI policies sorted and dealing with students' anxiety around AI, stay curious. We're still connecting the dots on this, but there's lots of really good evidence to suggest we're still on the right path. The path we've been on is still the right path, but we need to work harder at helping students to communicate their skills.
Excellent. Well, thank you all today for being with us, both the participants and our panelists. A massive thank you to Alex, Ashley, Joe, and Andrew for their time and insights today. We do want to note that if there's a link in the chat to download the report that we've been mentioning, so you can reference that. But thank you all for all the work that you all do to connect education and opportunity. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.